Hi, my name is Benedict. I haven't done a mix walkthrough for a long time, and while I'm going to file this in the mix walkthrough videos, it's not really a mix walkthrough. What I'm going to be doing is showing you an A-B and discussing a little bit how it came to be that I did this mix and the thinking behind it, but I'm not actually going to show you what I did. I mean, that is my stock in trade. There's no particular secrets here. These are all old classic ways of handling the situation that we were presented with. What I was presented with was this. It's a very laid-back track called Ambient Space. Kind of about the concept of space being huge, centered somewhat around the International Space Station, because there's some chatter in it. But the issues are, this is not a super clear mix, and interestingly enough, in stunning mono. I didn't notice this when I first listened to it, but it is. So I got sent the material and I made a new mix. So we transitioned from to this. Mono, original, stereo, new mix. Some of the chatter, original, new mix. Now I'll cover some of the stuff that was done, but not in any specific detail, because remember, this is not a tutorial. This is me talking about the important things. How it gets done, well, that's my stock in trade. If you want my help, I am very easy to contact. In this mode is Andreas Kuepper. Now, Andreas and I have known each other since, I think, very end of 88, if not 89. We were introduced by a mutual friend / acquaintance. I think it was Darren Ord. Darren was a very cool fellow, and he actually saved me from being beaten up in a taxicab line one night where it might have been a public holiday or something or other, but we were actually in the city rather than being in Brisbane, the Valley, where interesting people went. The city was a dangerous place because there were too many people from the suburbs who had boring day jobs who just beat up anybody who was remotely different from them, which wasn't much fun. But Darren saved me in a taxi line, and we already knew each other from around, and the fact that I was like a blackhead Billy Idol, and he had this massive leather jacket that he'd sort of made and altered himself. He actually made boots for a living, and he had psychobilly stuff on the back. He was big into Zodiac Mind Warp, and I think that's the point where he sort of said, "I'm going to introduce you to a friend of mine," because he saw the music thing in common. And so I was introduced to Andreas, and we very quickly became friends, obviously, because we were both doing the synthesizer music thing. Now, I was really only just beginning. I had no idea what I was doing. Andreas was way further along than me at the time. He actually has a fair pedigree. His brother is Ed Kuepper, the very famous Ed Kuepper of, well, obviously for being Ed Kuepper, because he's had a long career in Australia in alternative rock. He's kind of a godfather here in that sense, but also most famous for being from The Saints. I'm stranded, all alone and I'm stranded. I'm on my own. Wonderful song. I mean, some credit it as being the first punk record released. I don't know, I don't want to get into pedantics, but it was a hell of a record. And Andreas would be in his home in the garage as the Saints were practicing in the home garage, and I spent quite a bit of time over at his family home. I did meet Ed a time or two there. The first time I met him was actually in our apartment where Andreas and I lived, in my bedroom / studio. Ed came in and we had a conversation about Francoise Hardy, as you do when you are deep in EBM. But he was a nice fellow. Andreas had been in a band briefly in Brisbane called Paramore, which was one of the many always not very long-lived projects of a fellow called Craig Sue. Craig was an interesting fellow. I don't know him well. Hi, Craig. If you remember me, if you happen to see this, he's in Sydney last I heard. But Andreas and I lost contact for a very long time. He went to Tasmania, became a school teacher. With Steiner schools and stuff. But we became in contact again through the joys of Facebook and everything. And recently I saw him posting some stuff. He said he was going to get back into music again. And I heard something and I sort of thought, I can make that sound a lot better than that. Reached out and straight away he said, oh, okay. And then I realised there was a lot more stuff and I said, send it all over. Let me have a listen to what you've got. And I said, okay, let's work our way through these. And this one was the last one I just did. I've done a lot already. And most of them, there's only one that really hasn't worked as well as I'd like. Most of them we've gotten a big difference. This one obviously a very, very noticeably big difference. Now the stems that were sent over were actually stems in the sense that they're already pre-mixed down. So there are some sounds like just the bass, which don't really have anything else in them. These are with my processing. If I turn off the processing, raw, there's this thing. Now you might be noticing all of these are in mono. And also, of course, when they came across, they were not named at all. It just said track 1, or actually said track 1, track 2. This was pretty typical of things. Contains lots of things. So it's got drums and bleepy things and various quirky sounds. Obviously, I can't separate them. And they're in mono as well. All part of the joy. And it's led by this, which is again a couple of instruments. It's largely a sort of ostinato. It's just something that keeps repeating with some movement in it. And then there is some chatter.
On behalf of the first expedition, I'd like to give a big thanks to all the people on the ground.
Which, as I say, seems to be based around International Space Station. It's cool stuff. It stood out to me when I was listening to the 20 or so tracks that came over for, working out what we were going to do with them. So everything. Raw levels are terrible. And then with processing to mix them. Starting with mono source, especially for something that is very spacey, is obviously a less than ideal situation. Like I said, I'm not going to show you what I did, but I used some time-honoured techniques, but none of them are related to Haas, as in millisecond delays left to right. That's a bit of a... It has its purpose, but it's a bit of an atrocity. But... remained to be said, these are time-honoured and things which I rarely see or hear, although in Reason's latest version they actually use some of these techniques for a particular device. Do the math. There's also a fair bit of panning that's been moved into here just to keep things mobile. So you can hear, if we listen to Thudder, now remember I just attached these names because they were all just called track. That's in mono, and then put into stereo. And I've actually not just set it so that it's auto panning per se, it's actually changing the rate of pan. Again, not telling you how it's done, you should know. If you don't know and you want that kind of stuff done, hire me. I realise I'm wearing my Higher Hertz t-shirt, which I probably shouldn't be because I listened to a Higher Hertz video. Actually, I haven't worked for Higher Hertz for over a year or something like that. I don't even think it's a going concern anymore, so it's just one of my t-shirts. It's black. So the techniques were largely similar across all the tracks, but I also used slightly different approaches from one track to another, so they didn't end up all being the same. Listening in headphones or right up in my studio monitors, near field, it can sound a little spacey. But bearing in mind that this is music and most people aren't going to care, they're just going to listen to it and go, wow, isn't this nice and broad? Against this, which obviously is somewhat constrained. There's also a lot more clarity, so if we put mine into mono, we have a bit more clarity. Now, when Andreas came back, he gave his feedback and he was delighted, and he's a wonderful client in that sense. He's never a pig about anything, even where he's been unsure. We've talked about stuff, and that's great. Now, one of the things was he's like, oh, did you add some things? He's just like, no, I actually didn't add much of anything. I did add a little bit of automation to move some things because so much of it's kind of same. But it changes the focus. So the things that I've decided I want to focus on are a little different from what he's decided to focus on. Being a composer, a synthesizer user, he can tend to focus a little too much on drums and bass, and often his sounds, not so much in this, but in other things where I've managed to have, more material to mix than sort of 4 or 5 tracks. Every sound is like a universe in itself, which can become problematic, especially when everything is throwing off whoop, 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 whoop in the bottom end. But we managed to get a lot more clarity and focus. So I've focused more on the detail of the piece because, as I always say, drums are a dime a dozen. Every track's got drums. Bass is a dime a dozen. Every track's got bass. So while people feel obsessed with drums and bass, and I get it, especially coming from high energy in the early days, Andreas used to point out, your drums are very loud. Which is probably him politely saying, but your drums are too effing loud. I've learnt now that it's really in the detail that things stand out, and then you've got to create that sense of punch. So I've looked for punch, but also a lot more detail overall. And for those technically inclined, because people are obsessed with gear and I really don't care, I only know this because I specifically asked for this because I was intrigued partly as to why everything was in mono, and I figured I knew the answer anyway. It was just that this was made with physical hardware gear. He named 2 things. It was a Korg M50, ugly looking thing, and a Korg Electribe EX1 blue blob, I think. So there were a couple of layers which were condensed and with some effects on board and what have you, and then we just spat out. But for some reason they spat out in mono rather than stereo. I know they're both stereo instruments, at least that's my understanding, because it's stunned if the Korg M50 wasn't stereo, but somehow they've come out there. Maybe it was just easier for him to send one set out one side and one out another. I know I used to have to do that sort of thing sometimes in the old days with the Emacs, but nonetheless, they came pre-mixed in mono, and some of it's the M50 and some of it's the Electribe. I think that might be one of the early ones, and that's how we've ended up with this submix and with each of these parts in mono. And I think these were done sometime before. I will show a picture here, and that's his new putting his gear up again. And this comes from quite some time before. And so I think it was a case of like, oh, well, I'll export those bits, and then just kind of wasn't really prepared. So there's a certain amount of archive, fixing that's involved in this project. So again, we had the original, which was like this, and it's a really interesting piece. I really enjoyed it when it was in the list of things, but I was a bit like, I think we can do better. And then this, where everything is huge and wide and detailed and mobile. Nothing stays still in here at all, because nothing stays still in the universe. And of course, the ending, which I like.
On behalf of the first expedition, I'd like to give a big thanks to all the people on the the first expedition, I'd like to give a big thanks to all the people on the ground.
So it breaks down, we hear in more detail these things we haven't really been able to hear this way before. And I've automated the echoes because this actually becomes silence. He'd done something similar. I took my own path.
On behalf of the first expedition, I'd like to give a big thanks to all the people on the ground.
If you listen carefully, it moved. Alright, have fun. As I said, if there is anything that you want mixed or to work on sound design or production, record producer, not just me doing the beats and stuff. I can do some of that, but most of the time when people are asking about beats, they want hip hop stuff, and that's not my bag of wax. I don't really do that. Not because I'm not interested, just because it's not in my thing. I've done it once or twice, but the results are different from what people expect because I don't do the formula thing. But if you want mixing or anything like that, any of the higher thinking, then contact me. Links down below. Link down below also to Andreas's In This Mode page with the new mix, because he straight away, as soon as he got this, went out and replaced it and linked to me on Facebook and all of that, all the wonderful things that a person should do.